Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Conversations with Dr. Cybersecurity. And today I have a very, very special guest with whom I've been interacting on LinkedIn, and he's coming to us all the way from the United Kingdom. I want to introduce you to Dr. Mike Brass.
Thanks, and thanks for having me on here. As some people may be picking up from my accent, I'm actually South African. I'm 44 years old, and I'm both a Chief Information Security Officer as well as a Global Head of IT for a global company. I've been in IT now for almost 22 years. However, that's not my only background. I've dabbled in anthropology, I've got a history degree and multiple archaeology degrees from MA all the way through to PhD, both from South Africa and here in the UK, where I've been for the last 21 years. As you might see just from the background and wondering what that is, that's actually the Blue Nile in the Sudan. And this is because I am also an affiliate scholar at the University College London for the Department of Archaeology, non-tenured, so that just means that I don't get a salary, but I'm a fully fledged actual staff member there. And I actually happen to head and co-direct with a person from the University of Khartoum, an archaeology project in the south of Sudan at a site that goes back some 7,000 years. So I'm out there every couple of years for a few weeks, busy excavating and then writing it all up, etc. And it's a pretty important site for the history of the Sudan. It's got the second oldest domesticated sorghum in the world, and there's a bunch of other things that are involved. But that's not really the topic of this, although I can talk for hours on it as well. Um, I've been an IT manager now in different forms for the last 12 years. And within that period of time, it's been within the last 4 years that I've really started to get into the actual information assurance and cybersecurity side. And it was at that point that I started to realize actually how much of all of this that I was doing without really understanding how it was fitting in. And part of that is due to organizations regarding security as just being IT and technical. And so it's gaining that understanding of just how it impacts the enterprise as a whole and attempting to get senior leadership to understand that and to be able to action it.
Wow, what an introduction. So, this is the beauty of cybersecurity professionals, that they come from all walks of life and all kinds of backgrounds. And because everything is digital today, we really need everybody and their expertise and their various points of view to come up with holistic solutions and thinking. That is wonderful, Mike. So, what topics and questions, as you probably know, my guests decide the content of the show. So, what do you want to talk about?
I'd given this quite a bit of thought, and the one thing that I ended up on was actually how to build a team in a small, medium sized business. I didn't think that that was a topic that had quite been covered before, and it is of interest. To myself, given that our business, UBSense Limited, which deals in real-time tracking hardware and software location technologies, we are, as I said, we are a global company, but we are classified as a medium-sized business. And given the nature of the internal structure, this becomes very important that there are no actual silo. There are departments, but there are no silos within the organization. And there has to be cross-departmental cooperation and engagement
Mhm.
all the way. Therefore, you cannot have disruptive team members. You cannot have a team member who cannot be brought up to speed.
Right.
And so, how do you manage all of this? So, I was actually reading while I was on holiday recently. Your LinkedIn response to somebody stating that there isn't a cybersecurity IT's skills shortage, but
Right.
rather a shortage of modern interview skills.
Right.
And I thought that was a very good way of of actually framing it. And your response effectively got me thinking that sometimes, or the majority of the time, depending on the situation, it's not actually the fault of HR when you're
Right.
busy hiring for a team, but
Mhm.
instead actually how departments are run and how line management and hiring management is actually conducted.
Mhm.
And this falls into the realm that there are far too many companies with abusive micromanagement
Yep.
practices that are taking place, and therefore they don't actually know what they are talking about
Right.
in a large number of the cases.
Mhm.
So it becomes a question then of how does one build and manage a team?
Mhm.
And a lot of the literature that is out there and a lot of the discussions that are out there that I see always tend to fall back on a skills matrix.
Right.
Out. I mean, that's extremely good when you are reviewing the security posture of an organization, the relevant risk assessments that need to be undertaken, the reviews of existing controls.
Mhm.
But however, all of this, in my opinion, they are procedural matters.
Mhm.
And what really makes everything tick within a good organization are actually the soft people skills that need to be developed. And these skills are either present due to past experiences of people.
Mhm.
For example, this could be my own social science background where you have to openly engage
Right.
with people, or these skills need to be formally developed.
Yep.
I mean, these skills include the ability to talk to everybody from the vital receptionist all
Yes.
the way through to middle management, obviously, and the CEO, not being scared to actually engage for a few minutes with the CEO and being able to talk the language of the different people
Mhm.
at the different levels, from technical to explain to somebody how to print in Outlook. I know that's a ridiculous example, but
Mhm.
it exists, and
Yeah.
you've got to have those soft skills.
Mhm.
And to me, this extends to then being able to motivate and actually line manage your own teams. So you're pulling them back from the organization into your own internal team. And that internal team could either be a purely dedicated security team,
Mhm.
it could be an IT technical team, or it could be a composite type of team.
Mhm.
And you've pulling in for security matters one or two people from other departments, depending on the nature of that particular type of situation. In fact, it is the latter, in other words, the line management of your team for new managers, which I believe is the most difficult skill to master,
Mhm.
particularly when you're dealing with small, medium enterprises where you can have people, have companies from just a handful, a dozen people, half a dozen people, up to a few hundred. I mean, the EU
Mhm.
classifies even up to, think it's 350 or 400 thereabouts as a medium enterprise
Mhm.
before you start going. So that's a large number of people that you need to be able to handle. And I have my own ideas on this sort of thing, but in terms of somebody actually coming in to a management position, which could be a team leadership position or a departmental position for the very first time,
Mhm.
in your experience, what is the best type of approach for them to take to actually start hitting the ground running?
Yeah, this is an excellent question, and I love the way you put all that meat and context around that particular question. That was one of the biggest reasons that I wrote this book, because through my 30 years of experience in various companies, and then talking to multiple global CEOs from large companies that had 250,000 global employees to small businesses, the one common thing that I found with successful companies is that they have a culture. They're very clear about the mission. What does the company exist for? And that mission is driven into the brain's psyche, performance, passion of every employee they hire. Because if you're not focused on the mission, it doesn't matter whether you're a janitor or the CEO. If you don't care about the mission of the organization, first of all, you yourself won't be that passionate or successful in the organization and blend in and do the right thing. You'll probably be not getting along with a lot of other people, not understand what they're up to, and you'll be motivated by other things. So that is why in this book, you saw that very early in the book, I talk about mission. Then I talk about the values. Okay. So, and I talk about individual values. So, individual values are very important, but you see, a corporation and an organization also has values. If they don't have a value, they will never be successful, mainly because they will never have a culture. They'll just be all these skills driven or whatnot. They'll have people, but nobody really cares about the company. They won't be passionate about the company. To build that culture, you will have to adopt a set of values. And I talk about that. That is why this book was not written for cybersecurity professionals. This book was written for anybody and everybody to run the modern organization, which is information and technology and digital driven. That is the whole idea of this book. So you do those culture and values because we are in a knowledge economy. You see, in the skills-based economy is gone, right? That was in the third industrial revolution. We were primarily interested in assembly line kinds of things where people did a little thing, small little thing. So that particular skill was the most important. But right now, it is not the skill itself. It is more intellectual growth, brain. So it's brain development is what we're looking for. And now if you don't have the alignment, and as you mentioned, being able to talk to multiple people, interact with all kinds of people at all kinds of levels, so it does require those sophisticated communication skills. And as you mentioned, can it be learned? Absolutely. That is why every academic program that I designed had communication, not just to the executive level, but to technical people, oral presentations, written presentations, variety of presentations. As a matter of fact, many of my brightest students actually used to complain to me about all that work, all that writing, communications. Why do we have to do this, Dr. Hasib? And I say, you don't understand. I'm stretching your brains in areas where it is not used to being stretched in this kind of a field. And therefore, you're resisting, your brain is resisting. But if you go through this with me, once you graduate, you will see that your brain will be changed forever. And then you will actually appreciate the success that you will enjoy because of your communication skills. So you probably know that Angelina Sims is in the audience today. She's one of those people whom we are developing in that communications realm. So when she talked to me about mentoring her or anything like that, I basically said, Angelina, join Toastmasters because it will be the best thing you will do for yourself. Why? Because in Toastmasters, it's a nonprofit organization. It's global, so it's in UK, it's in India, it's in US, it's all over the world. It is so inexpensive to join. So, for example, in the United States, Toastmasters is about, I think, $130 or $40 for an entire year. Okay, where you can go and practice all kinds of communication skills. Within 5 minutes, you can boil down complex ideas, and that's what we learn. The other thing we learn is not to talk where you cannot be understood. So a lot of people have these tics in their language. They will do, or you know. And that detracts from somebody's concentration when they're listening to you, but you learn to get rid of all these. So clear communications will sound more credible, right? So if you're talking to executives and you're doing all this time, your message will never be as credible as if you went in there, instead of taking half an hour to explain something, took 1 minute to explain something in such beautiful language that the executives got a few beautiful quotes out of there. And the quotes are important because quotes help establish culture, help guide behavior. So, for example, in this new book, one of the quotes, and this book is full of quotes, one of the quotes that I put in there is, people are always trying to be perfect. And this is another reason why people are afraid to talk, because they're afraid, oh, I'm going to say something wrong or do something wrong. They're afraid to experiment. But I've told people, and this is another thing, that a culture that needs to be established, which is that don't make people afraid to talk or say something or criticize something. Don't penalize somebody for a new idea that might look really stupid when it's first articulated. All right, because that's not the whole idea, because we don't want to shut down new ideas. We want to talk about them. Let's see if it's stupid. Why is it stupid? Maybe by the end of the discussion it may not appear stupid anymore, right? So that innovation, the perpetual innovation culture value has to be there. And so when we do this to people, guess what happens? All of a sudden they become much more influential, and they're listened to. People listen, they also learn to listen to other people, right? So another key value that we learn at Toastmasters is the ability to listen, right? Because if my customer is saying something and I only want to push my agenda, that's never going to work, right? So you want those kinds of people that are also listening and then coming up with the right solution, and then also verifying, did I do the right thing for you? That's what they really have to do. That's what I believe. And then when you're onboarding and you are running these meetings, talk about the value. What does, say, let's say integrity is a value. Well, what does integrity mean in your little unit, whichever unit you're in? Talk about that. That is something that I used to do. And then running a meeting. What leadership? How do I develop leadership? So in this book, you probably saw that I had rotational meeting chairs. Well, similar things in Toastmasters, right? Everybody in every meeting, somebody is taking up a different role. Why? Because they get practice with it.
I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah. If you don't practice a role, you will never get it. And then they learn that leadership is not a position. It's a frame of mind.
It's frame of mind, it's a frame of doing. And everything you've just said, I mean, that helps both established and new leaders start to feel at home within the organization. It helps them gain the confidence. Now, in my experience, when you come into a new organization and there's some existing people and you're taking over with line management, obviously you've got to sit down. It's the usual. You've got to get to know them as a person, etc., etc. One thing, I mean, you're talking about a lot of things at the organizational culture, organizational structure, and ethos and values and everything, and all of that's extremely important. Then you start getting to the level one below that. And this is where it becomes an individual touch, because a person who's hearing all of these things can think, absolutely fantastic. What is my daily experience within the organization? What's my daily experience with this particular manager or this new manager? Or how am I going to cope with my colleague who used to be my good friend and is now my boss? I mean, and so you come to 4 kind of ingredients at that level below, in my opinion. And one is just physical. So you're given the people the chance to, whether it's at work or if they're working from home, the ability to be able to actually recharge their batteries and not say, you have to be in front of your screen from 9 a.m. in the morning to 5:30. If you need to take some time off to recharge, you can do so. That the person is trusted to actually do their work, number one.
Absolutely right.
Then there's the emotional side, and that's the feeling valued and appreciated for contributions that feeds into ethos, etc., that you were just talking about. There's the mentor being able to get their focus on particular tasks. And then this feeds back into what you're just saying, and various people have classified it as the spiritual aspect, and that's to feel part of the company's mission. And but at the same time, you've got to make sure that they're not feeling that you're demanding that their life is subservient to the company, that they are doing something valuable, but people also recognize that this is their job. They may love it to absolute pieces, and this is the best thing since sliced bread, and this is what they want to do. But family also matters, and family is always much more important than any company that you're working for. And you could be you working to get the money for your company, and you've got to have enjoyment and all of that, but
Mm.
you've got to make sure that the people have the right priorities. Yeah. And if they don't, you've got to provide some kind of mentorship in that regard. I'm not talking about being their psychologist, but
Mhm.
you've got to be there so you can say, actually, I feel you might be overworking, or you're not. And you've got to be there to be able to help correct and guide their path.
Right. That
And
team building has to be built. Right. Teams.
exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
And in that line, good line managers never actually assume this. So this falls back into what you're saying. You
Mhm.
sit, you engage, you get the full picture before making any kind of judgments. There's diversity of thought that needs to be welcomed. There needs to be actual team goals that are set. Now, one thing that's quite interesting with the team goals is it's the usual. You've got to be aligned with the company strategy, the company objectives, etc. And all of these get filtered down from senior leadership. You filter it down and you set the objectives and everything for your own team, etc., etc. Then there is the personal development that goes alongside that. And what's quite interesting is you can have the departmental objectives. You do look at a skills matrix. You do look at the different people's personalities and their different skill sets, and you attempt to identify that, well, this aspect that is currently lacking in the company, etc., or in your department, could be fulfilled by X team member.
Mhm.
And X team member is very enthusiastic about that at the outset. Then they go on the training and they find, actually, I'm not interested
Mhm.
in that particular. Whatever it happens, whatever that certification, whatever that skills training happens to be, that person has to have enough confidence in you as a leader to be able to turn around and voice that. And not only to say, I don't want to continue this, but also to say, and this is a very important distinction in my opinion,
Mhm.
I'm not going to continue that.
Mhm.
And if that person also says, well, you can feed that back into the senior leadership, etc.,
Mhm.
and I'll suffer whatever consequences.
Mhm.
You as a leader have got to say, okay, this hasn't actually worked out. Let's sit down. Let's revise what's going on,
Mhm.
because this is value that was proposed for the department and your career,
Yeah.
but you've obviously discovered that you're not interested in this. Your interest is lying a bit elsewhere, in which case we can still meet everything, but
Mhm.
let's sit, because the development isn't just about what is going to benefit the company. The development has to be there, yes, aligned to the company, but also, where does this person want to go in their career? It's one of
Absolutely.
the best things that you can always do as a line manager, apart from getting to know the people and guiding for the best bit of the organization,
Mhm.
is if in 2 years' time they decide they want to stay because this is a fantastic environment. Awesome. Hallelujah.
Mhm.
You've done your job. If in
Yep.
3 years' time they decide, I've actually now outgrown career and there isn't a role within the company,
Mhm.
I'm going to leave and I'm going to flourish. That
Yeah.
is one of the best feelings that's available. And it's no good for a person to be sitting insecure, micromanaging their team. They You're going to get resentment built up. There's going to be practices which aren't addressed, and there's going to be a bunch of faults. And the person's going to leave and say, thank God I was out of there.
Yeah.
And yes, they'll pick up some good points along the way, etc., and be grateful for that. But the overwhelming feeling isn't going to be one of sadness. I'm leaving. It's going to be, as I just said, thank God I'm out of here. And that's not something that a good manager should ever want to hear.
Right. Well, that is why I'm a big believer that we need to stop hiring managers and start hiring leaders. And that's all. We really don't need managers. We could get rid of every manager that's out there and only hire leaders who have supervisory authority, but they understand what leadership is, they understand how to build teams. So if you remember in this book, I talked about the CIO and the CISO's roles and team building being the central aspect of that role. Because if you don't know how to build teams and a whole bunch of teams, nothing is going to work. And this thing that you talked about, the ability to help somebody transition with their career goals, because the career goals and the company goals has to match. And when it's not matching, you can talk about transition plans, and that should be perfectly okay. My
Exactly.
people were always okay to tell me, hey, I want to do something else, and it could be outside the company. I never penalize people for that. In many cases, I helped them transition out, but that also allowed me to transition new people properly on board, and the person who was leaving was able to train and pass it on beautifully. So my thing was build stronger organizations where if a single person departs or whatever happens, like becomes sick or ill or even unfortunately dies, I mean, that could also happen, right? We don't want to be a single point of failure anywhere. So I even created succession plans for myself, right? Because who knows how long I would be at any given position, right? I mean, and that was the whole thing about every one of my teams. Every person was required to train at least one other person up to a certain level in the job that they were doing. And this cross training also created more collaboration, more understanding about each other, and better teamwork.
Somebody once said to me very early in my career, and this is a quote that's always stuck with me: the
Mhm.
best way to make yourself indispensable is to make yourself dispensable. And it's absolutely correct. In terms of for when you're line managing, one of the best skills, in my view, that you can develop in a team member is to
Mhm.
get them to actually project manage,
Yes.
because in the process of that project management, they are learning a bunch of transferable skills. It doesn't matter if it's a little tech project.
Mm-hmm.
You're engaging in parts of the organization, you're engaging with external stakeholders of whatever nature. And that is the very first foundations of them being able to assume leadership positions in the future. It doesn't matter if it's a department head, it doesn't matter if it's a technical head, if they're a technical lead and they don't want to actually have anything to do with the senior leadership in the organization. They've got to be able to lead in whatever they are doing in
Mm-hmm.
the future. And again, it doesn't matter if they don't want that managerial position. But if they're sitting there doing coding, for example, they've got to lead a coding project, this is extremely valuable. All of this is transferable.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the real start when you're dealing with team members. Get them involved in a project, get them familiar with your project methodology, in which in my case it's Prince2 in the UK, as well as obviously Agile, depending on different circumstances. And then you give them a project to do and you oversee it. You step in when you need to, you provide the guidance, and slowly but surely that they can take on more and more
No, this is a vital,
responsibility. And that's
absolute vital point.
absolutely needed.
Yes, that was one of the things that always was a part of my team. Also, everybody, didn't matter what they were, what role they were, always did some project. They were the leader of some project, however small that project might be, even if it was just an upgrade thing of whatever, right? Sometimes we may be going from one version of a software to another version of the software. Well, no problem. Even some of my student workers did project management and project leadership. And you're 100% correct. That aspect forces them to learn how to engage everybody else. And I would tell them that even I could be used as a project resource, but you have to convince me that your project is worth it for me to participate in. So you learn these negotiation skills. And it was just amazing how it helped people grow.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And it makes sure that they understand they've got to do this work within agreed time frames. It helps them understand alignment within the organization or even within the department or within a department team, stretches ability, etc., etc. And this is what, in my opinion, is so absolutely vital. And that's really what I was wanting to discuss and hopefully get across to a wider audience.
This is absolutely wonderful. This has been an amazing conversation, Mike. I'm so happy that you chose to come here and we were able to have this conversation. And I'm going to now conclude the recording and we're going to go into networking. Thank you very much, Mike.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.